His hand left my back before I reached the light. The ballroom doors had already been opened, and warm gold spilled across the marble and long, polished bars that caught on the hem of my silver dress. Music drifted under the chandeliers, soft strings and low percussion, but beneath it I could hear the sharper things. The click of glasses, the scrape of dress shoes, the brittle rise and fall of polite laughter. Ethan was beside me, close enough that I could smell cedar on his collar and the clean starch of his jacket, but not touching me anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the 100 faces turning. Not the servers crossing the room with trays of champagne. Just the empty air where his palm should have been. He adjusted his cuff instead. I matched my pace to his as we entered, my heels ticking over stone, my fingers curled around a small satin clutch gone cool in my hand. Across the room, people smiled at us the way they always did, as if a marriage could be measured by photographs and seating charts and the perfect angle of two bodies arriving together. Ethan gave them that angle without effort. He lifted his chin, nodded once to a councilman near the bar, then let his gaze travel past me toward the cluster forming around the raised black piano. "Stay close," he murmured, but the words landed late, after he had already moved half a step ahead. I followed him through perfume and candle wax and the faint citrus shine of polished wood. For anyone watching, we still looked practiced. That was the dangerous part. We had become beautiful at looking unbroken. A woman in emerald silk touched Ethan's sleeve to congratulate him on the expansion deal. He thanked her with that easy half-smile he used in public, the one that warmed his mouth without ever softening his eyes. When she turned to me, there was the usual flicker of delay, a small scramble for something personal to say. "Claire, you look lovely." I smiled and thanked her. Ethan was already answering someone else. A server paused beside us, bubbles hissing softly in crystal flutes. I took one because my hands needed a task. The stem was cold and wet against my fingertips. Ethan declined, not looking at me, because he never drank at these events until the speeches were over. I knew that. I knew the way he loosened his tie only after midnight. I knew he hated velvet napkins and lilies and centerpieces and songs with too much brass. I knew which silence meant he was tired and which silence meant he was angry. Lately, there had been a third kind. It looked almost peaceful from the outside. It felt like standing in a room where the fire had gone out an hour ago and nobody had said it aloud. "You're quiet," I said when the crowd shifted and gave us a narrow pocket of space near one of the tall windows. Beyond the glass, the city was all black mirror and red aircraft lights. Inside, the room glowed honey-colored, all candlelight and reflected gold. Ethan glanced at me, then to the floor manager crossing toward the stage. "Busy night." "They're all busy." My voice stayed even. "That never used to stop you." For a second, I thought he might answer honestly. His jaw tightened. I heard the tiny sound of enamel when his molars met. Then somebody called his name from across the room, and the moment folded shut. "We'll talk later," he said. Not unkindly. Worse than unkindly. Efficiently. He touched the middle of my back then, but only to steer me aside as two investors approached. His fingers stayed there for less than a second. A passing warmth. A gesture for traffic, not affection. The orchestra shifted into something slower. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor, while staff dimmed the wall sconces a shade lower. The air smelled faintly of roses now, cut stems, and chilled white wine. I watched Ethan from 3 feet away while he became, piece by piece, the man everyone preferred. Composed, attentive, amused at the right moments. Impossible to accuse of neglect because he never did anything large enough to name. That was the second dangerous thing. The cracks were all the size of threads. A missed introduction. A conversation ended with his shoulder angled elsewhere. A question answered without hearing it first. If I had tried to gather them in my hands and show them to someone, they would have looked like nothing. A friend brushed my arm and asked whether Ethan and I were staying for the donor breakfast in the morning. I opened my mouth, but Ethan answered from behind me before I could turn. "I'll be there." Just I. One word, smooth as glass. My friend's smile held for half a beat too long. "Of course," she said. "Claire, if you can make it." If I can make it. I felt the phrase settle on my skin like dust. Ethan had moved on by the time I faced him. He was at the edge of another circle now, one shoulder tipped inward, listening closely to something a woman in pale ivory was saying. She was not standing too near him. Not yet. Still, He bent his head to hear her over the music in a way he had not bent it toward me all evening. I did not know her well enough to attach a history. Only a name overheard twice this month, and once last week after midnight through the half-open study door. Lila. That was all. The pianist touched the keys for the opening notes of the welcome address, and the room began to funnel toward the stage. Ethan finally looked back for me. He lifted 2 fingers, a small signal, not tender, not rude, simply expecting that I would close the distance he had created. I did. Of course I did. We took our places beneath the chandeliers, shoulder to shoulder, while applause rose around us like rain on glass. But even with his sleeve brushing mine, I could feel it with perfect clarity, that strange, clean edge in the air, like the sound before a crystal cracks. I turned my head toward him just as he leaned away again, eyes fixed somewhere past me, and I knew before the night had even shown me how that something inside it had already decided to end. I could have stayed where he left me, smiling into borrowed conversation until the speeches began, but I moved. The hem of my dress whispered over marble as I crossed the floor, and each step brought me deeper into the heat of the room. Beneath chandeliers humming faintly above us, through the mingled scents of perfume, candle smoke, and expensive wool warming under stage lights. Ethan stood near the front now, just beyond the first row of velvet chairs, speaking to Lila and 2 board members. I did not hurry. I wanted to see the pattern clearly this time, not explain it away while it was still happening. A photographer angled his camera, and Ethan shifted instinctively toward the lens. Not toward me, toward her. One more, the photographer said, lifting a hand. Ethan didn't call me in. He rested his palm lightly at Lila's elbow to place her half a step closer to the center. It was a small touch, almost invisible under the applause starting near the stage, but I saw the exact pressure of his fingers through the silk. I stopped beside a pillar wrapped in soft amber uplighting. The stone was cool against my bare arm. Someone brushed past me with a tray of seared scallops, garlic and butter rising in a warm burst, and for one strange second that ordinary smell steadied me more than anything else. Ethan laughed at something one of the board members said. Lila tilted her head toward him. He bent to answer, close enough that she didn't have to ask him to repeat himself over the music. I had spent months telling myself his distraction was stress, that tired men grew inattentive and inattentive men could still come back. But stress had never made him careless with optics before. Ethan used to notice every room he entered the way a pilot reads instruments. Tonight, he was forgetting me in public. That meant he had already forgotten me in private for longer than I wanted to measure. The MC called for guests to take their seats. Chairs scraped softly over the floor. Programs rustled like dry leaves. I started toward our table, the sequined edge of another woman's gown catching briefly on my sleeve before she apologized and moved on. Ethan saw me then, not because he had been looking for me, but because the aisle narrowed and I was in it. Claire, he said, beckoning without a smile, as if I had wandered off from an assignment. When I reached the table, my place card had been moved. It sat one setting farther down than I remembered, beside a donor's wife I'd met once in April. Lila's card was at Ethan's right hand. The white cardstock was thick and crisp, her name written in black ink beneath the gold crest of the foundation. I touched my own card with one finger. This changed. Ethan was already pulling out his chair. There was a shuffle. It makes sense for Lila to sit here. She needs to be near the board before the presentation. He said it quietly, the way people speak when they believe calmness can make a thing reasonable. I looked at the empty chair beside him, then at him. And I need to beware. His hand paused on the chair back. Around us, silverware chimed against china. A server poured water. Ice clicked against glass. Ethan lowered his voice another notch. Please don't do this here. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because that sentence had arrived before I had even done anything at all. Don't do this here. Don't name what is visible. Don't interrupt the version of the evening that serves me. Lila approached then, smooth and composed, carrying a leather folio against her side. Oh no, she said, glancing between the cards. If this is awkward, I can move. Ethan answered before I could. You're fine. Fine. The word dropped between us with the clean weight of a stone. Lila gave me a polite smile, careful and almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. I slid my place card back to its original position beside Ethan's plate. The cardstock rasped over the linen. No, I said, looking at him. not at her. I'm sitting next to my husband. It was the first deliberate move I had made all night, and it changed the air at once. Ethan's eyes hardened, not dramatically, just enough to strip the warmth from his face. The board member at the far end of the table pretended to study the program. Lila remained standing for one thin second too long. Then Ethan took my card, lifted it with 2 fingers, and set it back where it had been moved. Not tonight, Claire. He did it gently. That was the cruelty of it. No raised voice. No scene. Only a public correction performed in the tone one uses with someone unreasonable. I heard the donor's wife beside my reassigned seat murmur, "It's all right, dear," as if I had lost track of protocol instead of my place. Heat climbed my throat. The stage lights glowed white over polished silver, bright enough to make every fork shine. I could smell coffee being poured somewhere behind us, dark and bitter. Ethan looked at me with that same efficient expression from earlier, but now there was warning in it. He was choosing the room over me, and he was doing it in increments so small he could deny every one of them later. I did not argue. I picked up my card, walked to the lower seat, and sat. Linen brushed my knees. The chair felt colder than the others, though I knew that was impossible. Across the centerpiece of white roses and glass votives, I watched Ethan lean toward Lila as the first speaker took the stage. He accepted the folio from her, their fingers meeting briefly over black leather. And then he turned his body, not fully, but enough. Enough that anyone looking from the front would read the arrangement exactly as he intended. Business at his right hand, wife at the margin. When the applause started, I joined it with everyone else. My palms struck together in a measured rhythm, quiet and exact. Then I reached for the water glass, took a single sip, and made my decision. I would stay through the night. I would watch every second with clear eyes. And if Ethan crossed the last line in front of all these people, I would never explain him again. Crystal clinked against crystal somewhere to my left. A bright, delicate sound that vanished under the low hum of money, laughter, and the hotel band smoothing jazz over everything sharp enough to hurt. Candlelight trembled in the mirrored panels, turning every face at the table a little softer than truth. I had just set my water glass down when the host called Ethan's name again, warm and familiar, asking him to stand for a recognition toast tied to the foundation's latest deal. Ethan rose with the easy confidence of a man who had worn rooms like this for years. His tuxedo caught a line of amber light. The starch in his shirt looked almost blue beneath the chandeliers. He put one hand against the back of his chair as if to steady it, then glanced to his right. Not at me. At Lila. "Come up with me," he said, his tone light, public, already decided. Lila looked surprised for half a beat, then pleased. Her bracelet gave a small silver chime as she lifted her hand to his sleeve. I stayed seated. The linen under my fingertips felt cool and thick, the embroidered edge pressing against my skin while the people at the next table turned in near-perfect unison to watch. Ethan had once known how to include me without effort. A hand at my back. A chair held a second longer. A glance that said we were still on the same side. Tonight he did not even perform that memory. He led Lila toward the small platform near the podium, and the applause rolled after them like something rehearsed. The room smelled faintly of peonies, red wine, and hot stage lights. From where I sat, I could see the sheen at the top of Ethan's glass and the polished black of Lila's heels as she stepped up beside him. The host made a joke about strong partnerships. People laughed. Ethan did too. Then, while the photographer waved them closer beneath the banner, he reached for Lila in the intimate, automatic way that belongs to habit more than thought. His hand settled at the bare curve just above her waist, fingers spread, thumb resting with easy claim against silk. Not guiding. Not accidental. Holding. The camera flashed once. Twice. I heard someone at the table behind me murmur, "Well." Another voice answered with a breathy laugh. Lila tipped her face toward Ethan as if she had been waiting to occupy that space all evening. He bent toward her to say something I could not hear, and whatever it was made her smile, without showing teeth. Then came the moment that split the room cleanly in two, what everyone could pretend, and what no one honestly could anymore. A server stepped too close with a tray, the edge nearly brushing Lila's hip. Ethan moved before anyone else did. He drew her in against his side with that same hand, shielding her with his body, lowering his head toward her temple in a gesture so proprietary, so practiced looking, that the crowd answered it before thought could catch up. Smiles. Raised brows. A ripple of knowing silence. His mouth came close enough to her hair to suggest possession even from 20 feet away. Maybe he said her name. Maybe he told her to watch her step. It did not matter. In that room, under those lights, in front of clients, friends, donors, and the woman wearing his ring, he marked her as the one at his side. Not with teeth, not with scandal, not with anything crude enough to be denied by decent people. He did it with fluency, with social grace, with the kind of touch that tells a room who belongs to a man and who has already been moved aside. Heat climbed my throat, then dropped out of me so fast my hands went cold. I set my napkin more precisely across my lap, because if I had not touched something, I might have stopped breathing. A candle near my plate guttered in the air conditioning and recovered. Across the table, Mrs. Holloway looked down into her champagne as though bubbles required serious study. Her husband adjusted his cuff. No one looked at me long enough to be caught looking. That was the final cruelty of polished people. They let humiliation happen cleanly, without the mess of naming it. Ethan turned back toward the camera with Lila still inside the line of his arm. Flash. Flash. The host thanked them both now, as if the correction had already entered the official version of the night. I rose then, because remaining seated would have made me part of the furniture. The carpet muffled my heels as I crossed to the edge of the platform with my own glass in hand. Ethan saw me at last. I watched the recognition strike his face and flatten. "Claire," he said, not loudly, a warning disguised as surprise. I stopped close enough to see the pulse moving once at the base of his throat. Lila eased half a step back, but did not leave his side. The photographer lowered his camera, waiting. Around us, the room held still behind a veil of clinking silver and distant saxophone. "You should finish your pictures," I said. My voice came out even, almost gentle. I lifted my glass a fraction toward them both, the stem cool between my fingers. "You've finally arranged the table to match the story." For one suspended second, no one moved. Ethan's hand left Lila's waist, but too late is a physical thing. It has weight. It hangs in the air where everyone can see the shape it leaves behind. Lila's smile faltered at the edges. The host cleared his throat, ready to rescue the evening if someone handed him a line. I did not. I took one step back, then another, forcing Ethan either to come after me or remain exactly where he had chosen to stand. He stayed on the platform. Of course he did. The room exhaled and began pretending again. A few people lifted their glasses. A chair scraped. The band slid into the next number as if nothing had happened. I returned to my seat only long enough to pick up my clutch and fold my shawl over my arm. When I straightened, Ethan was still under the lights, speaking quietly and urgently now, but not to me. I left my wedding ring exactly where the candlelight could find it. Beside the half-full water glass, on the white linen, a small bright circle cooling in public. Air conditioning breathed through the hallway vents with a dry, steady whisper, carrying the faint smells of furniture polish, lilies from the lobby arrangement, and rain beginning somewhere beyond the glass doors. By the time I reached the coat check, the noise of the ballroom had dulled to a distant metallic murmur, like silverware striking china in another life. My ring finger felt strangely light in the cold. I did not stop walking. The valet area beyond the revolving doors was washed in amber sconces and slick reflections from the wet pavement outside. A doorman in white gloves pulled the door open, and damp summer air touched my face, soft and warm after the ballroom chill. "Ma'am, your car?" he asked. I gave him the claim ticket from my clutch and stepped beneath the stone overhang, while rain stitched thin lines through the light at the curb. My heels clicked once on the marble, then settled. Behind me, laughter burst faintly from the ballroom entrance and fell away again. No one called my name. That was answer enough. I stood very still and watched the city smear itself across the black hood of a waiting sedan in rainwater and gold reflections. My hands moved without hurry. Phone from the clutch. Home screen lit blue-white. Ethan's name at the top of recent calls from another day, another version of us. I opened our message thread and looked at the blank field until the valet brought my car around, headlights sliding over the wet drive. Then I typed with both thumbs, exact and steady. "I won't be at the house when you get back." There was no accusation in it. No question. No opening for correction. I sent it, locked the screen, and handed my ticket to the valet. Leather seats breathed out stored heat when I got in. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar from the little card Claire from 6 months ago had tucked into the console, because Ethan said the new car scent made him sick on long drives. I set my clutch on the passenger seat, closed the door, and for 1 second let the rain drum above me like fingertips over a roof. Then I started the engine and pulled into the street. The city at night gave me cover. Traffic lights changed in silence behind wet glass. Wipers kept time. My reflection surfaced and disappeared over storefronts, oncoming headlights, bus windows. I did not cry. I drove home. The house sat where it always had, broad-shouldered and lit at the entry, pretending permanence. The porch lantern cast warm circles over the brick steps, and the climbing roses by the front walk gave off a heavy, sweet smell after the rain. I unlocked the door and stepped into a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen and the grandfather clock in the hall measuring out each second with patient indifference. Ethan's study lamp was still on from that morning. One of his ties lay folded over the arm of the foyer chair where I had left it after deciding not to remind him he'd forgotten it. I closed the door behind me and, for the first time all evening, took off my heels. The hardwood was cool under my stockings. I carried the shoes upstairs by their straps and entered our bedroom without turning on the overhead light. Street glow slipped through the curtains in silver bars. The bed was still made. My side table held the hand cream I always forgot to use, the novel I had stalled halfway through, a water glass with a lipstick print faded to almost nothing. I set my shoes down and pulled a suitcase from the back of the closet. The zipper sounded louder than it should have. This was not rage. Rage throws things. Rage slams drawers and breaks the air open. What moved through me now was cleaner than that. I opened dresser drawers and chose only what belonged to the next version of my life. Jeans, work blouses, undergarments, the navy sweater my sister had sent from Chicago, the passport from the lockbox, toiletries, chargers, my grandmother's bracelet from the velvet case, the folder with bank documents, and the lease application I had once started for a possible office move and never finished. Hangers slid on the closet rod with soft, dry clicks. Fabric whispered against fabric. In the bathroom, I placed my toothbrush, makeup bag, prescription bottle, and hairbrush into a small carry case with the same care I would have used for packing after a conference. Precise. Reduced. Final. On Ethan's side of the room, his watch box sat open from the morning, cuff links gleaming beside it like dropped coins. I did not touch them. In the laundry room, I took my winter coat and the tote where I kept chargers, receipts, and a spare key. In the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator and stared at the labeled containers, the cut fruit, the meal I had left for tomorrow because I still thought there would be a tomorrow that looked like the last one. I closed the door and wrote a note on the small cream stationery we kept in the drawer by the phone. Not a speech, just 4 words in black ink. Don't call for me. I set it on the entry table beneath the lamp where he would see it before anything else. Then I crossed into the den and opened the household binder I had maintained for 6 years. Contacts, schedules, insurance cards, password hints he never bothered to learn because I was always there to answer before he finished asking. I removed only my personal documents and left the rest exactly where it had always been, because tonight was not about punishment. It was about withdrawal. I was taking my hands off the machinery. Back upstairs, I changed into soft clothes, tied my hair up, and carried the suitcase down 1 step at a time. The house watched me in mirrors and polished surfaces, giving me back a woman I recognized more with each trip to the car. On the final pass, I paused in the foyer. The tie on the chair, the lamp glow from his study, the note waiting beneath it all. I listened for instinct, for hesitation, for one last impulse to protect him from the consequences of his own ease. Nothing came. I turned off the hall light, took my keys, and locked the door from the outside, leaving the house warm, orderly, and missing the one person who had kept it that way. The leather on the steering wheel had already cooled under my hands by the time I pulled away from the curb, and the house behind me sat dark except for the porch light, a square of amber on the wet concrete. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and stopped. I drove with the windows cracked an inch, letting in the thin night air and the smell of rain rising from the pavement, because the car still held traces of Ethan's cologne from that morning, and I could not sit inside it without changing the air. At the 3rd red light, I took off my wedding band for the 2nd time that night, not because I had forgotten it was gone, but because my hand kept reaching for the pale groove it had left behind. The small apartment I had arranged under my own name was 14 minutes away, over a pharmacy, with a narrow stairwell that smelled faintly of bleach and old wood. I carried only what I could lift in one trip from the trunk: a suitcase, a garment bag, my laptop case, a shoebox of documents, the framed photograph of my mother that had always stood on my dresser and had never once mattered to Ethan enough for him to notice when I moved it. The key stuck once in the lock, then turned. Inside, the place was quiet in a way our house had never been. No hum from the built-in refrigerator, no late-night sports from Ethan's den, no dryer running because I had started one last load before bed. Just the soft rattle of the old window unit and the hollow sound of my heels crossing bare floors. I set the boxes down in the kitchen, peeled the event bracelet from my wrist, and laid my phone face up on the counter beneath the yellow stove light. One message thread sat at the top like a sealed door. "Ethan, are you being dramatic right now?" I looked at it until the screen dimmed, then brightened it again with my thumb. My chest rose once, carefully. I opened the settings, shared my location with no one, muted his notifications, then blocked his number before I could read anything else that might make me explain myself to the man who had not explained himself to me when he placed another woman beside him and pulled her close under a room full of chandeliers. The click of that decision was so small it could have been mistaken for nothing. Still, the room changed after it. I crossed back to the suitcases and knelt on the braided rug, the rough fibers pressing through my stockings into my knees. From the outer pocket of the garment bag, I took the envelope I had prepared weeks ago and never admitted, even to myself, that I was preparing. Copies of bank statements, my passport, the deed records with my highlighted tabs, the card of an attorney whose office smelled like lemon polish and paper. I lined them on the tiny kitchen table, one beside the other, as if setting a clean place for a life that had waited too long in the hall. Then I called the building manager's after-hours number and left a calm message asking him to remove my name from the visitor log visible in the front office and to route any deliveries through the upstairs side entrance. "No problem, Ms. Warren," he said when he called back 2 minutes later, sleepy and polite. "Do you need anything tonight?" "Just discretion," I said. "Understood." When the line went dead, I let out a breath I had been holding since the ballroom. I took off the navy dress Ethan had once said made me look impossible to ignore, hung it in the closet by itself, and changed into a cotton t-shirt and soft gray pants that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. In the bathroom mirror, my makeup had settled into the fine lines around my eyes. There was a smudge near my left temple where I must have touched my face after I saw his hand at Lila's back. I washed it all away with hotel-size soap and cold water from a rust-edged faucet, then stood there barefaced under the hard white light until my skin lost the heat of the evening. On the counter, my ring lay beside a cheap ceramic dish shaped like a shell. I did not put it in the dish. I slid it into the back of the medicine cabinet behind a bottle of aspirin and shut the mirrored door. In the bedroom, I opened my laptop and sent 3 emails before I could change my mind. One to the office administrator, brief and exact, requesting that all future correspondence related to my consulting work be directed to my personal address, not the house. One to my bank manager, asking for a 9 a.m. call regarding account separation and access. One to myself with scanned copies of everything important attached, because I had spent too many years making sure Ethan never misplaced what he needed, and I would not begin this new life by trusting memory. I turned the sound off on my phone completely. The room felt colder after midnight. I folded my coat over the back of a chair, set my keys on the windowsill, and finally allowed myself to stop moving. The silence pressed differently here. It did not accuse. It did not ask me to smooth it over. It simply waited while a siren passed 4 blocks away and the radiator pipes tapped once behind the wall. I sat on the edge of the mattress, looked at the empty half of the room no one had claimed, and understood the precision of what I had done. I had not run. I had removed my hands from the machinery. At 12:17 a.m., Ethan called from a private number. The phone vibrated against the tabletop in short, insect-like bursts, then went still. A second later, an email banner appeared on the screen. "Claire, open the front door." I stared at the words, at the command dressed up as confusion, and reached for the laptop instead of the phone. By 12:21, I had changed every password that had ever included his birthday, our anniversary, or the name of the dog we never got, because he said we traveled too much. When the last confirmation check mark appeared, green and final, I closed the computer, turned off the lamp, and let his email sit unanswered in the dark. Morning came in as a thin gray strip around the cheap blinds, and the radiator clanged awake before I opened my eyes. The room smelled faintly of dust warmed too fast, and the coffee shop downstairs beginning its first brew. I lay still long enough to hear my phone remain silent on the nightstand. No vibration, no chime, no need. Then I sat up, pulled my hair into a knot, and crossed the cold floorboards to the kitchen, where the window glass sweated at the corners and the city below was already scraping itself into motion. I made coffee in a borrowed-looking machine with a cracked lid and drank it standing up while steam fogged the pane above the sink. At 8:03, my bank manager confirmed the first of the account changes in a voice, so even it made the whole thing sound administrative, almost forgettable. At 8:19, the office administrator replied that all future documents would go where I asked. At 8:41, I turned my phone sound back on for exactly 1 minute, watched 6 missed calls from numbers I did not know populate the screen, and turned it off again. Control was not the same thing as peace, but it had a shape I could hold. At 9:12, Ethan used his own email at last. "Claire, where are you?" "I'm at the house." I read only the preview line before locking the screen. I could picture the foyer without trying. The lamp by the entry table, the smooth wood under his hand, the note where I had left it, the warm order of the rooms opening around him with no breakfast dishes in the sink, no dry cleaning reminder on the counter, no charged-up laptop in the study waiting for him to forget it there. For years, I had made our life appear effortless by arriving before every consequence did. This morning, I did not. I took a quick shower in water that turned lukewarm too soon, dressed in jeans and a cream sweater, and went downstairs to the cafe because staying hidden in the apartment felt too much like waiting to be found. The bell over the door gave a bright little shake when I entered. Heat hit my face from the espresso machine, carrying roasted coffee, orange peel, and burnt sugar. I chose a table near the back wall, where I could see the street through the front windows, but no one outside could look directly in. My laptop opened. My pen moved. I made a list in a narrow, exact hand. Attorney at 11, post office box, new phone plan, remove auto pay access, contact storage. Item by item, my life shifted onto paper where it answered to me. At 10:07, my sister Mara called. I let it ring once, then answered because she was not part of Ethan's orbit and because she had a way of hearing the truth under the sentence you actually said. "You okay?" she asked, no greeting, just the low kitchen warmth of her voice. Cups clinked behind me. Milk hissed through a wand. "I left," I said. There was a pause, not stunned, only careful. "For the night." No, the silence on her end changed shape. I heard a cabinet close, then her exhale. "Do you need me?" "Not yet." "Do you need a lawyer?" I looked down at my list and put a check beside the first line. "Already handling it." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Good." She did not ask what he had done. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not offer the kind of mercy that only stretches a wound until it looks neat. "He called me at 9, she said. "Asked if you were with me." My fingers tightened around the paper coffee cup until the lid clicked. "What did you say?" "That if he didn't know where his wife was, he should start with the last place he saw her." For the first time since the ballroom, something sharp and almost clean passed through me. "Thank you, Claire." Her voice lowered. He sounded, not confused, cornered. I glanced out at the street, at people in dark coats stepping around each other in the weak sun. That's new for him. After we hung up, I finally opened Ethan's email. "I'm at the house." "What is this?" "Call me now." Another one had come 3 minutes later. "Claire, this is ridiculous. If this is about last night, we can talk when you stop overreacting." Then another, time-stamped 9:24. "Where are your things?" I stared at that one longest. Not "where are you?" Not "are you safe?" The radiator hiss from my apartment had been replaced here by the grinding burr of coffee beans and the wet slap of a barista knocking grounds from a metal filter, but the same cold steadiness settled into me. He had seen the closets. He had opened drawers. He had walked through a house that still stood straight and polished and understood, for the first time, that order had never been the natural state of his life. It had been me. At 10:32, another email arrived while I was still looking at the screen. "Don't do this. People are already asking where you are." I almost laughed at the phrasing, at the reflex buried inside it. Not I'm asking. People are asking. The room around me continued without interest. Cups steamed. A spoon rang against ceramic. Someone opened the door and let in a strip of winter air that smelled like bus exhaust and wet wool. I closed the laptop, finished the last bitter inch of my coffee, and stood. Ethan had entered the morning believing I would come back into place if he pressed hard enough. Instead, he was standing in a spotless house with my note in his hand, my side of the closet empty, and no one left to tell him what to do next. By the time I stepped out onto the sidewalk and turned toward the attorney's office, he sent the first message that did not sound like a husband issuing instructions. It sounded like a man who had finally looked around and found the walls moving. Claire, please. The apartment lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and wet concrete, and the brass edge of the directory caught a cold strip of noon light as the door side shut behind me. My phone trembled once in my coat pocket, then again, then kept going until the vibration turned into a small, trapped pulse against my ribs. I did not look at it until I was inside the elevator, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the mirrored panel that threw back a woman with a paper folder in one hand and a face I almost recognized. Ethan had sent 6 messages by then. The first had been my name. The next asked where I was. The last one only said, "Please pick up." I slid the phone back into my pocket as the elevator climbed, the cables whining softly above me, and stepped into the attorney's office with winter air still clinging to the hem of my coat. The receptionist offered me water in a clear plastic cup that sweated onto the glass table. The conference room smelled like copier toner, stale coffee, and the dry paper scent of files that had held too many endings. I signed where I was told, initialed twice, confirmed the apartment lease, the account transfers, the change of mailing address, the request that all further communication go through counsel, if necessary. Each page made a small whisper against the table when I turned it. Each signature looked steadier than my hand felt. By the time I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the sky had flattened into a hard white sheet over the city, and another message had come through despite the block setting, because he had switched phones. I read this one. "I know you're angry. Come home, and we'll talk." I stopped beside a parking meter cold enough to sting my palm through the glove, and stared at the words until the screen dimmed. Come home. As if the place still meant the same thing. As if a room stayed yours after everyone in it watched you be erased. I unblocked one number long enough to send exactly one line to Mara. "If he calls, do not tell him where I am." Then I blocked him again and drove to the house, one last time while I knew he would still be out chasing control. The neighborhood sat under a brittle afternoon light. Bare branches clicked against one another over the driveway. Inside, the house held that expensive, polished quiet we had once mistaken for peace. I walked straight to the study. The leather chair gave under my hand with a soft creak. His desk still held the order of a man who assumed the world would leave his things untouched. Brass pin tray, square black cufflink box, a stack of folders aligned with the edge, and the blue notebook where I kept every password backup, vendor name, emergency contact, and date he never remembered on his own. I took the notebook, then the file copy of the insurance renewals, then the key to the off-site storage unit from the shallow right drawer. In the kitchen, the refrigerator motor kicked on with a low mechanical growl. I opened the side panel where I had taped the plumber's number, the pet sitter's number from years ago, the alarm reset instructions, the landscaper's winter schedule. I peeled each one off. The sound of adhesive lifting was dry and final. In the laundry room, I removed the envelope marked taxes from the top shelf. In the mudroom, I took the spare garage remote from the ceramic bowl where Ethan had dropped his keys 1,000 nights without looking. None of it felt dramatic. That was the point. Catastrophe rarely announced itself with shattered glass. Sometimes it looked like an empty hook by the door, a file drawer that no longer contained the right answer, a man reaching for the machinery of his life and closing his hand on air. My phone rang again while I was locking the front door behind me. Another unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered without speaking. For a second all I could hear was engine noise and a turn signal clicking in the background. Then Ethan's voice came through, too fast, too level, the way it got when he was trying to hold the edges together by force. "Claire, don't do this." I looked at the front walk, at the thin line of salt on the brick, at the print my boot had left in a patch of old frost. I already did. Silence. Then his breath, rough against the receiver. "What does that mean?" It means you'll need to remember your own life now. A car passed at the end of the block, tires hissing over damp pavement. He spoke my name again, lower this time, and I heard it then. Not command, not irritation, not the practiced confidence he wore in rooms full of other people. The sound had changed shape. "Where are the Henderson contracts?" he asked first, because habit dies hard. Then, before I could answer, "No, forget that. Claire, listen to me. I can fix last night. I put the key into my pocket. You can't fix a room that agreed with you. It wasn't like that. You seated her in my place." Another breath. Nothing behind it. "I need to see you. You need a lot of things." I ended the call and turned the lock one last time. 15 minutes later, my phone lit with a message from the office manager at Ethan's firm, one of the few people practical enough to skip pretense. "Ethan missed a meeting because he can't find the materials for tonight. Did you move them?" I stood beside my car, cold wind needling through my scarf, and watched the little dots of my own breath disappear. The answer rearranged itself inside me before I typed it. "No, I took what belongs to me." Then I switched off the phone completely, placed it face down on the passenger seat, and drove away while, behind me, the first pieces of Ethan's carefully held world began to fall without my hands beneath them. Rain tapped against the windows in thin, fast needles, and somewhere beyond the glass a delivery truck backed up with a dull electronic chime that kept repeating into the gray afternoon. The sound followed me through the lobby of my building, through the elevator, through the apartment door after I set my keys in the bowl and stood still long enough to hear nothing else. My phone stayed dark on the kitchen counter until I turned it back on. When it finally caught signal, messages surged in so fast the screen seemed to shake under them. There were missed calls from Ethan, 2 from numbers I did not know, 1 voicemail from his mother, and a text from Mara that simply read, "Call me when you can." I called her first. The line clicked, then filled with the soft hiss of a television in another room and the clink of ice against glass. "He went to your office," she said without hello. "You mean my old office?" I asked. "Yes." A beat. And then home again. Then he called me from the driveway. I crossed to the window. Cold from the glass seeped through my fingertips when I touched the edge of the frame. Down on the street, headlights smeared across wet pavement in white ribbons. "What did he want?" "You." Mara let out a breath that sounded halfway between anger and disbelief. "But not just you. He wanted to know if you'd taken the tax files, who handles the furnace service, why the alarm code changed, whether I'd heard from you, and whether this was really necessary." The radiator hissed awake beside me, pushing out heat that smelled faintly metallic. I closed my eyes for a second and could see it without trying. Ethan in the driveway with rain on his coat shoulders, phone at his ear, asking practical questions first because practical questions felt safer than the truth. Mara kept going. His mother was there too. She kept saying this had gotten out of hand, like it was weather. "Did she ask where I was?" 3 times. "Did you tell her?" "No." The answer came sharp as a snapped thread. "Claire, listen to me. They all sound different now." I said nothing, and she filled the silence. "His mother said she didn't realize you handled the insurance claims, the contractor bids, the holiday travel, the medication refills for his father, the dinner seating for their charity board, the thank you notes after every event." I asked her who she thought was doing it. She got quiet. I moved toward the sink and pressed my palms to the cold porcelain edge. In the cabinet above it, my 1 coffee mug sat alone on the shelf beside 2 clean plates and a carton of crackers. The apartment still looked like a place borrowed from somebody more temporary than I intended to be, but it was mine in every direction I turned. "Lila," I asked before I could stop myself. Mara made a dry sound. Apparently, she showed up at the office this morning and walked straight back out after 20 minutes. "Your husband was snapping at people, couldn't find what he needed, missed a client review, and asked whether anyone had seen a folder no one else knew existed. She left before lunch." A bus exhaled at the curb below. Water streamed down the window in crooked silver lines. "And the people from last night?" I asked. "They're talking. About me? About themselves, mostly. About what they saw and didn't say." I leaned my hip against the counter and listened to the apartment settle around me. The tiny click inside the baseboard heater, the low drip from my umbrella onto the mat by the door. Mara's voice softened. "One of the women who was at your table called me because she couldn't stop thinking about your face when you stood up. She said she wanted to tell you she's sorry." "Did she?" "No. She asked me if it would be better to wait." I looked at my reflection in the darkening window, ghosted over traffic and rain. It would. I know. There was another pause, then Mara said, "His mother is coming to me tonight. She wants to know what to do." I almost laughed, but the sound caught halfway out and disappeared. "That's new. Claire." Her voice turned steady, deliberate. "You need to decide what happens if he shows up there." I looked around the apartment again. The narrow galley kitchen, the second-hand lamp throwing a honey-colored circle over the table, the folded legal copies in a neat stack beside my keys, the deadbolt shining on the door. Not much. Enough. "He doesn't come in." "You're sure?" "Yes." Saying it changed the air. It made the walls feel less borrowed. Mara was quiet for a moment. Then I heard paper rustle on her end. Maybe mail, maybe a grocery list, ordinary sounds from a life that had not split open in public. "Then I'll tell him that if he calls again." "Tell him something else too." "What?" I straightened and reached for the folder on the table, running my thumb along the clean edge of the top page. "Tell him not to send anyone to speak for him. Not his mother. Not his friends. Not the people who watched." Mara answered at once. "Good. If he has something to say, he can say it himself." Rain struck harder against the glass. Somewhere in the building a door shut, then another. "He will," she said. "He already sounds like a man who has run out of other people." After we hung up, I stood in the fading light until Ethan's name lit the screen again. This time I answered before it could ring twice. The line carried the hollow acoustics of a large room and the faint clatter of dishes. As if he were standing in the kitchen we had once crossed around each other without looking up. For a second neither of us spoke. Then he said my name as though it had weight now. I kept my hand on the folder and listened to him breathe. "No one can reach you for me anymore," he said. "Good," I told him. "Then you finally understand where this conversation starts." The radiator in the hallway clicked like a tired clock, sending thin bursts of heat into the cold apartment. And the late afternoon light lay pale across the hardwood floor, turning the brass door handle into a strip of dull fire. On the small kitchen table, beside a sealed manila folder and a ceramic mug gone cold, Claire listened to the silence after the call as if it were something solid enough to place a hand against. Then she picked up her keys, slid the folder into her bag, and left before the sun had fully dropped behind the neighboring buildings. Ethan was already outside the law office when she arrived, standing under a gray awning while wind pushed dry leaves against the curb in scratching circles. He had come without the loosened confidence he used to wear like a second coat. No driver. No assistant. No room full of people to soften what he had done. The collar of his shirt sat uneven beneath his overcoat, and when he saw her step out of the cab, his hand tightened around nothing. Claire stopped several feet away, the concrete still damp from an earlier drizzle, city noise moving around them in a restless stream of brakes, footsteps, and a distant siren. "You found me," she said. "Mara didn't tell me," he answered quickly. "I figured out where the paperwork would be filed." His voice caught on the last word, roughened by too many sleepless mornings and too much empty space. She gave one small nod. That, at least, sounded like effort. He looked at the folder in her hand first, then at her face, as if one might still save him from the other. "I know what I did," he said. "No." The word came quiet, almost gentle, but it stopped him more effectively than anger would have. A gust of cold air lifted a strand of her hair and pressed the smell of wet pavement and exhaust between them. "You know the moment everyone saw," she said. "That isn't the same thing." Behind the glass doors, a receptionist crossed a lobby with a stack of files, and somewhere inside, a printer started up with a dry mechanical whir. Ethan swallowed. "I know you held everything together," he said. "The house. My schedule. The investors' dinners. My mother. Every mess I walked away from and found cleaned when I came back. I know I treated that like it would always be there." Claire's fingers remained still around the strap of her bag. "And when it wasn't," she said, "you finally looked." He flinched the way some men did when the truth arrived without being raised. I was wrong. This time he did not dress it in explanation. About Lila. About that night. About letting a room believe you could be moved aside and still stay. About thinking you would wait for me to decide when to care. Traffic rolled through the intersection in a hiss of wet tires. Across the street, someone laughed too loudly outside a coffee shop, and the sound vanished as quickly as steam off a grate. Claire studied him in the flat winter light. He had come here expecting a door. She could see it in the way he stood, forward without realizing there was nowhere left to enter. "The papers are simple," she said, drawing the folder free and holding it between them. "The apartment lease is in my name. The joint accounts are separated. The house staff has new instruction through the agency. Anything that belonged to me is already gone. Anything that belonged to you was left where it was." Ethan stared at the folder, but did not take it. Claire. Her name in his mouth had lost all command. It sounded now like someone reaching into a dark room and finding only air. "I'm not asking for the house," she said, "or an apology in front of witnesses. I'm not asking you to ruin yourself the way you let them think I should ruin myself to stay married to you. I am asking for one thing." At last he lifted his eyes. "Sign." The word landed between them with more force than a slammed door. For a moment he did not move. The city kept moving for him. Buses coughing at the curb, a bicycle chain rattling by, the metallic clink of a flagpole against its bracket overhead, but he stood inside a stillness of his own making. "If I sign," he said, and the sentence broke there because both of them knew what came after. Claire did not rescue him from it. "Then you stop waiting for me to come back and make your life comfortable again," she said. "You live in the shape you made." He shut his eyes briefly, the way a man might against bright light, though the day had gone dim. When he opened them, there was no bargain left in his face. Only comprehension, late and clean enough to hurt. He took the folder. His thumb brushed the edge of the paper, and she noticed absurdly that his hands were cold. Inside, in the lobby's yellowed glow, a security guard opened the door for them without a word. The conference room upstairs smelled faintly of toner, coffee, and polished wood. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Ethan sat across from her at a narrow table, reading every page this time, not because he hoped to find an escape, but because at last he understood what it meant to look directly at something before it disappeared. When the pen touched paper, the scratch of ink sounded louder than it should have. He signed once, then again, each signature steady by effort alone. Claire signed after him, slid the final page to the attorney, and watched the woman stamp the documents with a firm downward press. The sound was small. Irreversible things often were. Outside, evening had deepened by the time they returned to the sidewalk. The wind had sharpened, carrying the smell of snow from somewhere beyond the river. Ethan stepped out beside her, but not close enough to claim even the shadow at her feet. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. She considered him for one last second. This man who had mistaken endurance for permission, silence for loyalty without limit, love for a structure that would stand no matter how he neglected its beams. Then she looked past him to the row of lit windows across the street, to the cab pulling up through the fading light, to the life waiting for her, without his name attached to it. "Yes," she said. "Remember this the next time someone goes quiet while you keep taking." The cab door opened with a blunt metallic click. Claire got in without looking back. Ethan remained on the sidewalk with the signed copies in his hand, the cold gathering at his shoulders, the city moving around him as if he had always been alone there. By the time he understood her value, she no longer belonged to the life that had learned it too late.